University of Vermont.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone. Today I'm just going to talk about the growth and recruitment of juvenile lake trout in Lake Champlain. To start, lake trout were extirpated from the lake in 1900 for reasons that are not entirely clear. There was a small commercial fishery for lake trout in the lake around this time, but their catch rates just weren't high enough to warrant the decimation of that population. In 1973, stocking began in Lake Champlain in an effort to build a new lake trout population. These fish were all fin clipped to discern between any potential wild fish that would end up showing up. These fish run on an alternating 5-year schedule so we can accurately age the fish without having to kill them. Annual adult assessments are conducted each fall. This is done to 1, collect the brood stock, and 2, see if there's any natural reproduction going on. Egg traps and fry traps have been set on these spawning sites, and we've collected fertilized eggs as well as seeing fry leave in late April and early May. So we have natural reproduction going on, that's great. We have fertilized eggs and we have fry leaving the spawning sites. But we don't have any wild fish that are showing up back to these spawning sites, so we don't know what's happening to those fry once they leave. One of the big issues is we didn't have any juvenile assessment going on. That's where Dr. Ellen Marsden and our captain Steve Cluett come in. They started juvenile assessment by bottom trawling in 2015. This involved sampling once every 2-3 weeks throughout the ice-free season from April to November in the central section of the main lake in Lake Champlain, as well as 2 to 3 times each year in the northern and southern sections of the main lake. And what they found in that first year was a little staggering. We had 4 wild year classes of juvenile fish and 4 year classes of stock juvenile fish. And this is the first time we saw different year classes of wild juveniles actually showing up. Very exciting. So we got a lot of data. We collected length data, diet data, condition data. We compared the stocked fish to the wild fish. Because we were sampling so frequently, we could actually look at seasonal shifts in length and condition for these fish. We continued sampling into 2016, 2017, and 2018, so we could actually look at overwinter growth, or the potential for overwinter growth for wild and for stocked fish. So we have a lot of data to work with here. This leads to the 2 hypotheses for this presentation. One is that feeding and growth would continue over winter. Lake trout are a cold water species. They should be able to handle the chilly winters on Lake Champlain reasonably well. They're also at a stage in their life where they're trying to grow as often as they can because they need to get to that apex predator lifestyle. So any chance they can to grow, I feel like they'd try and do it. Secondly, we think that feeding and growth may explain the distribution of these wild lake trout in the main lake of Lake Champlain. We were seeing the majority of our wild fish were in the central section, so we just wanted to see if maybe the length or condition data was showing us why there's a skew there. So what we have here are length frequency histograms for the wild fish and stocked fish from our trawls in April of this past year. There's only 3 things I want to show for this slide. One, we have 3 clear non-overlapping cohorts of fish because at these young age classes, the fish won't overlap in size. It's exciting because we don't have to kill the fish, we don't have to look at aging structures to accurately tell what age these fish are. The stocked fish are a different story. There's a lot of stuff going on there. It's pretty muddled. That's where looking at the fin clips gives us the age data. The final thing I want to look at here is the age 2 wild fish and the age 1 stock fish, and they're relatively the same size. And that comes back to when those stocked fish are dropped in the lake in the fall, they're dropped in at fingerling size, which is relative to the ideal age 1 wild fish. So they're a year advanced to these wild fish, so they have to be compared based on size and not on age. This is the summary table for the last 4 years of sampling. We caught a lot of juvenile fish. The key thing to look at here is the percent wild has increased from almost 28% to right around 66%. Big changes are happening in this lake. The stocked fish are continuing to be dropped in at the same rates every single year, so their catch breeding effort should stay relatively stable throughout this time frame. So it's really the wild fish that are showing up that are causing this change. And we're just catching a lot more fish. When we look at from a distribution standpoint between the central, north, and southern sections of the lake, the central section is where we're seeing the bulk of this change, going from almost 29% to between 73 and 74% over 4 years for percent wild, and then in the catch community effort, it's jumping from almost 1 fish to 6 fish in 10 minutes of trawling. The southern section of the lake is also seeing a rise, whereas the north is not seeing anything at all. But it's really that central lake that's seeing, the most, interesting rise in these fish. When we look at age 4 and older fish that no longer fully recruit to our trawl, or it's more of an incidental catch, in the central section of the lake, we're seeing some of those year classes that we caught in 2015 that are showing up in the trawls. Just to mention, this picture right here is just from one trawl of sampling, so just one 10-minute tow, we were able to get that many fish, which is very exciting and fun to go on these trips. Here we have growth curves from our 4 years of sampling. We have 6 wild year classes and 5 stocked year classes. The gray vertical bars shown here are the winter seasons, so when we're not doing any sampling. A couple things I'd like to take note of here is that we have positive slopes in winter. We have growth going on in winter. Just by looking at the data, we can see that. Before we even get to looking at statistical tests, we're seeing there's some growth happening here. I'd also like to note that the wild cohorts have slightly larger or similar slopes to the stock cohorts. Tells us that they're doing pretty well out there, which is very exciting. And when we look at the results for the overwinter growth of fish, we're seeing that the wild fish are indeed growing over winter. The stock fish, the majority of them are statistically changing in length over winter. When we look at condition, most of the fish are staying right around the same, which is telling us foraging has happened. If the condition went down, it means they're using up their internal stored resources from the summer and fall to try and get that growth. By not changing in condition, it's telling us that they're feeding to grow in length. When we look at geographic variation, we didn't find a lot of trends here. Nothing to tell us that the central site is better than the north and south. We're just seeing that many more wild fish there. So it's not length and condition that are telling us really anything about why we're seeing that many more wild fish. To summarize, the catch community effort and percent of the wild juveniles is increasing in the lake. It's a very exciting time. I'm very glad to get on this project. Seeing a lot of wild fish, and it's a good thing for Lake Champlain. Growth is continuing over winter. This is something that has not really been looked at in lake trout, but makes sense for them being a cold water species. Something that will require a little more look in the future. We should be seeing some wild lake trout showing up at spawning sites. We would have expected some this past fall, but our spawning sites are in the northern and southern sections of the main lake. The majority of our wild fish are in the central lake. It would lead us to believe that there's some spawning going on in the central lake that we just haven't got a good beat on yet. With that, I'd like to thank our captain, Steve Cluett, deckhands Brad Roy and Brian Zabel. I'd like to thank the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission for their funding, as well as the various grad students and undergrad technicians that helped out with this project. With that, I'll have any questions. Yes.
When I was looking at the growth curves, the slope didn't look like it changed between